You heard me right. Minecraft has a big problem. Well, actually, Minecraft has a lot of problems, but this time I'm going to be talking about a specific problem. That being the game's balancing. Material value, survivability, movement, and structures are going to be my main talking points today. With all that said, let's dive right into it. So, you saw the thumbnail, you clicked on the video, you're probably thinking, oh my god, this dude is crazy. Gold better than diamonds? I mean, what planet does this guy live on? Well, hear me out, because I'm not joking. Think about what gold can be used for. Golden apples, golden carrots, powered rails, villager trading, bartering with pigs. I think gold's biggest strength is golden carrots, which is arguably the best food in the game, and the bartering, which gives an alternative way to progress through the game. Gold also has many ways to be easily obtained, which may seem counterintuitive to my bad balancing argument, but most of my issues with gameplay elements being unbalanced aren't the individual elements in a vacuum or isolated, it's how good or bad they are relative to other gameplay elements. And I think that the balancing of gold is just fine. With that being said, think about what diamonds are used for. We got diamond tools, okay, I mean, a jukebox, cosmetic, firework stars, cosmetic, enchanting table. That's the only really good one. The only super important thing that diamonds are used for is a stepping stone towards netherite tools and enchanting tables. Aside from that, diamonds don't really have individual value. Unlike gold having many gameplay uses that you can reasonably use consistently through the game, diamonds only really have that one. I would say that diamond pickaxes could be used for nether portals, but at this point, most people know you can just use a bucket. Even if you don't know about buckets, ruined portals that can be finished are pretty common, and you don't really need a diamond pickaxe for the ones that can be finished. Honestly, I think even iron might be better than diamonds, because the tools and armor you can make with them aren't that much worse in their functionality, they just have a lot less durability. But iron is so infinitely easier to come across than diamonds that the durability and slightly less utility that you get is almost irrelevant. This doesn't really make any sense. It's definitely the most important material in the game. There is a lot more to talk about in terms of material value balancing, but the rest of my issues are more relevant in another section. Speaking of iron, there's one specific use that it has always bothered me quite a bit. For anyone with a brain, you probably already know what I'm talking about. Shields. I mean, shields are probably the single worst balancing issue that Mojang has ever made. It's really bad. The fact that an item that takes 1 iron to craft is more valuable than an entire set of armor from the same material, but with 24 of it, that's just absolute lunacy. Using shields, you can negate most attacks in their entirety. Arrows, explosions, punches from a zombie, you name it. On top of that, durability isn't really an issue, because not only can you apply enchantments, but there's no reason for you to, even, because it takes an iron and some wood. Just make a new one. Speaking of blocking arrows and explosions, that segues pretty well into the next thing that I want to talk about in the survivability section, the hostile mobs. I'm sure this is a talking point that you've heard before, but Minecraft's hostile mobs are laughably easy to deal with. Not even just because of shields, far from it. The main issue is that they're slow and you're fast. Before beta 1.8, the player was also slow, so the mobs being slow was perfectly fine. But after beta 1.8, the speed of mobs wasn't changed, but sprinting was added. And over the past 10 years since then, their AI is essentially the same. They're just a little bit better at pathfinding. On top of that, ranged weapons like bows and crossbows trivialize most mobs that you encounter in the game, and the skeleton, which is the only common mob that can actually do damage from a range that isn't right in your face, doesn't really do that much. The only common mob that I think is actually dangerous are creepers, since if they catch you off guard, which can, of course, happen to anybody, they can kill you near instantly. But here's the problem. Most of the time, they won't catch you off guard, and if they don't catch you off guard, then they're very easy to deal with. I mean, you can run away from them, you could punch them away from your range, you could use a shield, you could place literally any block between you and them to reduce the explosion damage to a mere fraction of what it would have been, regardless of how close you are or the blast resistance of the block. A minor little nitpick I have concerning hostile mobs as well is that I think that the Ender Dragon could use being a little bit harder. I mean, it's advertised as the final boss, but in actuality, once you know how it behaves, it is pretty easy. I mean, in my opinion, the Endermen are honestly a bigger threat than the dragon is. Another thing that trivializes common hostile mobs that is a much bigger inherent issue that you can't fix as easily is the sleeping mechanic. Beds are really easy to craft, and most of the time you don't even need to craft them. Not only are most common hostile mobs essentially made optional with 3 wool and 3 planks, but even if you do run into them, obviously you can just run away, like I said earlier, or block with your shield. This is why the combat and the mobs are pretty unbalanced. I think food is also broken kinda in a few ways, mainly with how easy it is to take so much of it with you. Another minor point I think it's kind of silly that the best foods in the game are pretty much cooked steak, cooked pork chop, and golden carrots. But golden carrots are only better in terms of saturation, and they're much more difficult to obtain than the other two. The movement balancing section's actually going to be quite short, since my main issue with movement balancing is just being able to run away from mobs. But there's some other things as well. Now, most people might think I'm going to talk about the Elytra, but I actually don't have any issues with the Elytra, or by extension, end cities as a structure. They're meant to be rewards for completing the game. Now, do I think that the Ender Dragon and completing the game in general is too quick and too easy? Yes, I do, but that doesn't mean that the end cities are overpowered. If you're a Camman18 enjoyer, you already know that minecarts kinda suck ass. They're pretty much the hardest movement in the game to actually set up and use effectively, and they don't really reward you for it at all. They're slow and expensive. They suck. I think horses, donkeys, and the upcoming camels could probably use a little work too, since by the time you actually manage to find them and you have a saddle on hand, you might already be nearing the point where you have an Elytra. On top of that, even if you are far from having an Elytra, they're pretty slow. And now it's time for the longest section in the most egregious balancing decisions. In my opinion, the overabundance and oversaturation of structures in Minecraft has ruined the game's balancing. I mean, the game is called Minecraft, but most of the time, because of structures, mining is actually the worst option to get common materials.
Don't believe me? I mean, that's okay. I didn't expect many of you to agree without evidence, so I ran a test. I spent about 2 hours loading random seeds and picked the best 5 seeds with oceans and best 5 seeds for digging underground. From there, I gave myself 10 minutes to gather as many materials as I possibly could using only those 2 methods, and then recorded my findings. The results are damning. On average, caving for 10 minutes gave me 24.4 iron, 4.2 diamonds, 0 emeralds, 1.6 gold, and 9.8 lapis. On average, ocean spelunking for 10 minutes gave me 40 iron, 1.8 diamonds, 21 emeralds, 11.2 gold, and 14.2 lapis. The only one that caving did better was diamonds, with a 57% decrease. However, I'd like to note that the only reason why that happened is because of an insane outlier run where I got 16 diamonds in 10 minutes. Aside from one other experiment, I found 0 diamonds within 10 minutes in the caves, and I even died on the last experiment before finishing. Had this outlier not occurred, the average caving diamonds would have been just 1. There's also 3 crucial details that I forgot to mention before. All of the iron and gold I found while caving, with the exception of making an iron pickaxe, a shield, and a water bucket, was unsmelted, since I obviously didn't have time to do that if I wanted to guarantee an even remotely fair chance against ocean spelunking. This is another benefit that you'd receive from looting oceans instead. Buried treasure also netted a lot of water-breathing potions, cooked fish, TNT, and Heart of the Seas that I didn't even consider in my initial analysis. In my opinion, the most important factor that makes shipwrecks the obvious victor, even disregarding those two things, is the lack of any danger. Throughout the 5 ocean runs, I hardly took any damage at all. In the caving runs, I nearly died several times and did die on the last trial. With all that being said, I think the winner is pretty clear.
In the past, structures were much less involved in the game. It used to just be the dungeons, mineshafts, villages, fortresses, strongholds, and the 2 biome structures. When these were the structures in game, the loot that they had and their rarity warranted their existence, and it was still exciting to find one of them in hopes of diamonds, even though it was rare. It pretty much matched the rarity of finding diamonds normally, so the balancing was fine. But now there are many more structures. The loot tables for the old structures has not been updated or adjusted at all to match the new structure abundance, and the new structures generally have stronger loot. So now the older ones are obsolete and almost entirely cosmetic. They've lost their place in the game. I said earlier that the material value balancing would be more obviously bad later in a different section, and this is exactly why. All you really need is a boat, and you're unlikely to even take any damage. Whereas with mining underground, especially with the new larger caves, you're in much more danger than if you were just on a boat looking for ships. I think even if they just made shipwrecks and buried treasure a little bit harder to find, it wouldn't be as much of an issue, but they are really easy to find, and they're common. Next, I'm gonna talk about villages. Villages used to not be that bad. They were less common, didn't have beds in them, and they weren't that well lit either, so they weren't that safe. Now villages are way more common. You're almost guaranteed a free bed you don't even need to craft, which is already a broken game mechanic as I described earlier, and you're very likely to stumble across absurd amounts of food, either in chests or in the hay bales that can spawn in most village types. This removes any challenge based on hunger for a really long time, and potentially removes that challenge at the very beginning of the game. Newer villages are also more well lit, and you get any choice of free house. Basically, villages remove all challenge from the beginning of the game, and I thoroughly dislike that. Before we move on to the other half of this video, I want to talk really quick about ocean monuments. In theory, I think they're awesome. But as soon as you memorize where the gold spawns, you can reliably get in, take the gold, and leave without being in any danger. And the bosses don't really drop anything useful, so you have literally no reason to stick around. Also, I think milk removing all potion effects is not great. I think it would be better if you had to mix certain solutions to get rid of certain effects so that you'd actually have to prepare and remember recipes, or at least look them up somewhere, in order to get rid of a specific challenge. Like, if you needed to make a certain brew to cure poison before you went into a mine shaft and dealt with cave spiders, that would be cool. If you needed to make a certain brew to get rid of mining fatigue and safely navigate a monument, that would be pretty cool too. For the last bit in the structure portion, I am definitely going to make an entire video about why ancient cities suck in terms of balancing, so I'm not even going to bother talking about that here, but it's actually the opposite issue that I've generally found, in that they are not overpowered, they are ridiculously underpowered. There's like no reason to actually go there. I'll explain it in a different video. Okay, so by now, if you've heard me talking for like the past 15 or so minutes, in your head, you're probably saying, yeah, all this is easy for you to say. I bet you couldn't do any better. Well, actually, yes, I could. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I would do it better for every single issue that I talked about. Alright, so I'm going to skip material values and go straight to survivability, since I plan on fixing that through balancing other features. Alright. Obvious first goal, nerf the ever-living hell out of shields. In order to increase material value, I actually want to introduce shield tiers and make the current way that shields act equate to the diamond shield. Stone shields wouldn't really make sense. But I think wood, gold, iron, diamond, and netherite shields would be good additions to the game. First, I'm going to describe changes that I'm making to all shields. For one, this is probably the most controversial thing that I'm going to say about them, but I don't think that you should be able to offhand shields. It's a skillless method of reducing any damage, regardless if you were prepared to react to it or not, and I disagree with this. This is going to force the player to keep the shield in their hotbar, taking up a slot, and would require quick reaction time on the player's part to switch to it and use it for anything that might surprise you, like a creeper explosion. And to make the mechanic not ridiculously annoying, I'm going to remove that obnoxious cooldown time from after you switch to it. You're just going to be able to switch, right-click, and its functionality will work instantly. Also, aside from the diamond and netherite shields, damage is not going to be entirely negated, it's only going to be reduced, and it's going to be reduced more based on which tier that you're using. Certain attacks will also do more durability damage than others, with some shields specializing in absorbing certain attacks better than others. Now I'm going to describe each shield's strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, the wood shield is going to be the weakest, and I think that it should also be specifically vulnerable to fire and explosions. So if you attempted to use it to protect yourself from maybe a blaze or a ghast or a creeper explosion, I think it should break near instantly. Iron shields would be the most balanced, being generally strong against everything, and being the first tier where arrows do no damage to the player. However, I think arrows should do extra points towards the durability on any shield so that you're still encouraged to kill skeletons as fast as possible. Gold shields, I think, would have a very interesting mechanic, because it's canon that gold has higher capability for magic in the Minecraft universe because of its higher enchantability. I think that gold shields should negate any splash potions sent in the direction that you're facing while using it, meaning that witches would pose basically no threat, and it would be very useful in any potion-based PvP situations. Also, it would provide 100% damage reduction against any magic attacks, such as the Guardian Beam, Evokers, Shulkers, the Wither effect from Wither, and the Wither Skeletons. Although, to balance that last part, the Wither attacks are going to eat away at the shield's durability very quickly. Aside from that, it's going to be similar to Iron in terms of its basic capabilities, but obviously with drastically lowered total durability. Diamond shields would block any conventional damage entirely, but they would actually have a weakness against explosion damage. Their durability would decrease drastically if used against an explosion, and you would still take damage yourself, even if it was reduced. Obviously, it would boast a higher durability than the previous tiers as well. The netherite shield would be sort of a direct upgrade to the diamond shield. It would have really good capability against explosion damage, blocking it entirely and only losing a little bit of durability, but would actually take damage from all other conventional means. This would give the player a reason to have both a netherite shield and a diamond shield, not devaluing diamonds at all. Next, we move on to the generally combined the movement, mobs, and combat. In my opinion, the easiest way to balance mobs is to nerf sprinting substantially. The mob behavior doesn't even need to be changed. I think if a sprint bar was added that was affected by different food types, this could serve to balance food and combat at the same exact time in a sort of non-invasive way. I think that food stack size should also be reduced to 16 because 64 per slot is kind of excessive. I think that you could balance material value more in this way because getting more armor means taking less damage, and with the way that regeneration works in game right now, taking less or no damage is highly rewarded because of the saturation system. So, this would also buff golden carrots, as the saturation would be more important. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that the sprint bar idea is only good if it also balances food, and I think the perfect way to do that, like I said, is to make it affected by different food types. The better that the food that you eat is, the sprint bar should last longer, and maybe you could even go faster or go slower, depending on what you've eaten. Since the sprint bar is added, it makes traveling by foot a little more difficult, which will also inherently buff all other forms of movement that don't involve walking by foot, because they're unaffected by the sprint bar and hunger. I think horses and minecarts deserve a well-needed speed boost. I think minecart tracks should also be cheaper to craft. I think I'll add a diamond minecart as well to the game. It's going to be significantly faster than the normal minecart, fits Minecraft pretty well for obvious reasons, and would also buff diamonds as a material. And I think horse armor should be craftable. Saddles can remain as structure loot because at this point structures are so oversaturated, they're not that hard to come across. I don't think they should be craftable. Originally, I had to think a lot about how beds would be nerfed. I thought that I would never really come up with a satisfactory solution, but I came up with an easy, simple idea that I think is honestly kind of genius, and it's another thing that balances two birds with one stone. My idea is actually also a phantom nerf. Rather than phantoms punishing you for not sleeping, I think that they should punish you when you do sleep, and they shouldn't burn in the daylight so that they can attack you when you sleep in the morning. On top of that, to nerf village beds and villages in general, I think villager happiness needs a total rehaul. Personally, I believe that villagers should actually get rather angry with you if you sleep in their beds, or at least if they catch you sleeping in their beds. If you go into their houses, take anything from chests while they're watching, or break anything in the village, the total village happiness should decrease. If the total village happiness gets below a certain negative threshold, not only will all of your trade prices be awful, I think that, at a certain point, they should actually get the iron golem to start targeting you and drive you away from the village. In order to be accepted in the village, you'd have to be kind and trade with them. If their happiness reaches a certain positive threshold, their trades would be cheaper, and they'd no longer care about you going into their houses or loitering around. For shipwrecks, I don't think that the structure itself should be nerfed in any meaningful capacity, except for the loot pool just shouldn't have diamonds, even though they're already kind of rare. I think the best way to balance shipwrecks is to just give them an associated danger when exploring with them. First of all, the methods for getting air underwater, like doors that are really cheap, and similar such methods, those should just not exist. Anything like that should be waterlogged as soon as you place it. Magma blocks are a little bit of a gray area for me. I think that it might be fine if you keep them the way they are. I mean, they have an intended game mechanic to give you air underwater. Also, I think adding a hostile mob associated with shipwrecks, maybe a squid or some other sea creature that lives near them or uses them as a home, would balance the loot and introduce a new challenge. For buried treasure, I think this loot table should not be capable of containing diamonds just like shipwrecks, but I think that any diamonds that do generate should maybe be replaced with emeralds. Maybe even make them significantly more common than they are now. Make buried treasure a way to consistently get more emeralds. If you're meant to believe through the lore that these are pirates and emeralds are currency with villagers, maybe it makes more sense for emeralds to be found. Also, I'm going to remove the Heart of the Sea from its loot table entirely, and that might be confusing now, but I'm going to fix this in another balancing issue later. For Mineshafts, I think it would actually be pretty cool if there was a chance to get high-level enchanted iron, stone, wood, or gold pickaxes. It would make the loot table unique and more valuable relative to others in the game, but the tools would have varying durabilities, with higher durability being exponentially more rare than lower durability. This makes sure that the tools that you could make yourself aren't devalued. It's more of a temporary thing that you can find to assist you on that mining trip and that mining trip alone. Nether fortresses are probably one of the least balanced structures, being one of the most dangerous with some of the most mediocre loot, aside from the diamonds. I think fortress chests should actually have a chance to contain valuable potions, since the fortress contains the ingredient for a brewing stand and the ingredient for awkward potions. It makes sense thematically. I think a rare chance to contain netherite scrap or ancient debris similar to bastions could also be a good idea. It would encourage you to actually seek out these fortresses and deal with the danger associated with them. but it definitely shouldn't be as common as you can find them in Bastions, because I do not want to devalue them. I actually think Bastions are really well balanced, and I have no issues with them at all. Lastly, the ocean monuments. I think the player should be incentivized further to explore them, and they should not be so easy to cheese. The solution is simple. Make the gold spawn farther inside of the structure and make it more random. Also, the Elder Guardian should drop the Heart of the Sea that I removed from the buried treasure loot table earlier. Now, if you want a conduit, which I think is pretty overpowered for what it does, you really have to earn it. I'm not entirely against milk negating mining fatigue, but again, with the solution I proposed earlier with making brews that heal certain effects, I think that would be a better idea. I think that mining fatigue should also be given to the player more often so that you would actually need to dedicate a lot of resources and inventory space to a strategy that involves getting rid of it. Most of the challenge in ocean monuments comes with navigating them, especially since they're underwater, so if you go in with like aqua affinity and respiration and then just use milk on your mining fatigue, even if you didn't know where the gold blocks were, you could just break through the walls and look for it until you find it. I know I talked about the Ender Dragon earlier briefly, and I originally wasn't going to describe how I might change it, but honestly, I think it's pretty easy. The old dragon behavior, where it would charge you, was terrifying and a lot more dangerous than anything that it does right now. Honestly, I think that they should probably just add this back.
Oh, and one last thing. For those worried about the inventory, especially after my food stack size change, I'm gonna be banking on the bundles actually being good whenever they decide to put them into the game. The concept looks great, it's just a matter of the final execution.
With all of these changes made, I believe that I have managed to make a much more balanced version of Minecraft that isn't insufferable to play, and not so different that playing it in this form would be jarring and immediately warrant a negative reaction. Do you disagree with anything that I said? Do you think that something's already balanced? Or do you maybe disagree with the way that I balanced it? Please tell me. Discussion is encouraged in the comments, and I'd honestly love to hear what you all have to say, and I'll try to reply to everything as much as I can. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out my other videos if you like video essays, and subscribe if you like the content. Thanks for watching. Bye bye!